What if I told you that the person investigating a murder was actually the murderer? That for months, a killer sat across from detectives, helping them analyze security footage of his own crime, consoling traumatized coworkers, and even suggesting leads to follow. This isn't fiction. This is the twisted reality of a case where a man's job was to catch criminals, but he had become the most dangerous one of all. A case where a father's excitement about his growing family turned into a death sentence the moment he walked into work. And the most chilling part? The killer almost got away with it. This story will challenge everything you think you know about criminal investigations. Because what happens when the very person everyone trusts to solve a crime is the one who committed it? How does someone maintain their composure while sitting across from detectives, knowing they're searching for them? And perhaps most disturbing, how close did this killer come to the perfect crime? In 2013, in a quiet town in Hamburg, USA, a man walked into work every single day living the ultimate double life. His colleagues saw him as their protector, the guy who caught the bad guys. But behind that facade was someone planning something unthinkable, and when his carefully constructed world began to crumble, he didn't just steal, he killed. Meet Bernhard Grucza. Though you might be surprised to learn this isn't actually the name from our original source. Bernhard was described by local journalists as being involved in one of the most shocking cases they'd covered, and his story reads like a cautionary tale about how financial desperation can corrupt even those we trust most. Born in March 1975, Bernhard appeared to have it all figured out early on. He graduated high school in '93, then did something impressive. He earned a degree in criminal justice while working full-time. That takes discipline, right? During this juggling act between work and school, he met Heather, and by 1997, they were married and building what looked like the American dream. The couple were hustlers in the best sense, both working multiple jobs, pooling their resources, and investing in real estate. By 2006, they'd managed to purchase a beautiful home worth nearly $500,000 in Elma, New York. But here's where it gets interesting. Despite having rental income from multiple properties, Bernhard took a job at Toys R Us in 2007. Why would someone with that kind of real estate portfolio need a retail job? He eventually climbed to regional loss prevention manager, earning $90,000 annually. But beneath this picture-perfect facade, cracks were forming. In 2008, Heather received devastating news: a breast cancer diagnosis. Medical bills started piling up, and somehow, despite their substantial income, the couple had accumulated an astronomical $1.2 million in debt. How do you spend that much money? The bankruptcy filing in 2009 forced them to sell most properties, though they kept their primary residence and a few others. The financial pressure was crushing, but there were other warning signs. Neighbors reported heated arguments echoing from their home. Police were called multiple times for domestic disputes. The stress was clearly taking its toll on their marriage, but the most disturbing incident occurred on June 8, 2013. During what witnesses described as an explosive argument, Bernhard did something that raises questions even today. He fired a 9mm handgun through a window of their home. But here's the strange part. According to reports, he may have been staging his own harm to test whether Heather still cared about him. When she heard the gunshot and rushed to find him on the floor, he apparently rolled over and revealed it was all a manipulation. What kind of mindset does that reveal? This incident led Heather to file a domestic violence order against him, stripping Bernhard of his legal right to own firearms. But as we'll see, legal orders are just pieces of paper when someone has already decided to break the law. What happened to their marriage after this terrifying incident remains unclear. Publicly available records don't reveal whether they formally separated or divorced, adding another layer of mystery to Bernhard's psychological state during this period. Now, after the bankruptcy, Bernhard had caught a financial break. A family member came into money and shared some with him. He'd escaped his debt obligations and had cash again. But it wasn't enough. Despite his role preventing theft, Bernhard began systematically stealing from Toys R Us. Reports suggest he stole approximately $223,000 worth of merchandise and cash, primarily selling stolen goods on eBay. But here's what's chilling. Bernard reportedly looked down on the petty thieves he caught, not for their crimes, but for their incompetence. In his mind, he was superior because he was methodical, invisible, successful. He had insider knowledge, access to security systems, store keys. He thought he was untouchable. Which brings us to Larry Wells, a man who was described by a veteran crime journalist as being universally loved. Born in 1977, Larry had been managing the Hamburg Toys R Us for 7 years. Colleagues remember him as having a childlike enthusiasm for toys and creating a family atmosphere among staff. He'd married his high school sweetheart, Jill. They had a 4-year-old daughter named Madison, and on the morning this story takes place, June 29th, 2013, Jill was pregnant with their second child. Everyone knew how excited Larry was about becoming a father again, including Bernard. By this point, Bernard had been embezzling for months, but stealing merchandise and reselling it online was risky and time-consuming. Why not cut out the middleman and go straight for cash? He knew the store's security inside and out. He knew Larry's routine, arriving before 4 a.m. to oversee deliveries and stocking. But what exactly was Bernard's plan that morning? And how much did he intend to steal? At 3:55 a.m. on June 29th, Larry and his team began unloading a delivery truck at the rear of the store. This was Bernard's window. At 4:24 a.m., security footage captured a figure in dark clothing and a mask entering the store. The intruder moved with calculated precision, avoiding camera angles, sticking to the perimeter where shelves provided cover, even altering his walking pattern to avoid identification. Most disturbing? The footage shows him carrying a large knife throughout this invasion. By 4:32 a.m., he'd reached the manager's office and disabled the security system by unplugging the DVR. But exactly how much money was in that safe? Some estimates suggest no more than $10,000, hardly life-changing money for someone who'd already stolen over $200,000. So why take such an enormous risk for such a relatively small amount? Meanwhile, another employee arrived and noticed the side door was propped open before opening hours. Strange, but not alarming enough to investigate further. Bernard had keys, but he'd forced the door to make it look like a break-in. Everything was going according to plan. Until Larry finished with the delivery and decided to get an early start on paperwork. When Larry walked into his office around 4:40 a.m., he found someone robbing the safe. His immediate reaction was to try to apprehend the intruder. In the struggle, Bernard's University of Florida Gators cap fell off, and in what police described as a desperate moment, he reached for his knife and stabbed Larry multiple times in the upper body. But here's where the story gets murky. Police later stated they believed Bernard intended to steal, not kill. So what really happened in that office? Was this a panicked reaction or something more calculated? And why did Bernard leave behind both the money and his bloodstained hat? At 5 a.m., another colleague arrived for his shift. When Larry didn't respond to radio calls to unlock the front door, the employee entered through the still open side door and began his routine. Multiple staff members were now in the store, but the building was large and everyone had tasks to complete. Then, at 5:45 a.m., the store alarm began blaring. Staff radioed Larry to shut it off, but there was no response. A young female employee, being closest to the manager's office, went to investigate. Her screams echoed throughout the entire store. She found Larry slumped in his chair, surrounded by blood on the walls, floor, and furniture. The wound was so severe she initially thought he'd been shot. The discovery sent the remaining staff scrambling from the building, fearing an active shooter might still be inside. When paramedics arrived, Larry still had a faint pulse. They rushed him to the hospital, but he succumbed to his injuries during transport. A father who'd left home that morning excited about his growing family would never meet his second child. The investigation immediately focused on the 4 employees present that morning. One seemed nervous under questioning. Another arrived late with no clear alibi. The third had discovered the body. The fourth refused to answer questions and behaved strangely throughout interviews. But the real break came from evidence left at the scene, that University of Florida cap found beside Larry's body. DNA testing ruled out all 4 employees, leaving investigators puzzled. Who else had access? Who else knew the store's layout and security systems so intimately? Enter the loss prevention expert they called in to help review security footage and explain how the store's systems worked. Yes, that expert was Bernard Grucza himself. Think about this for a moment. Bernard was not initially viewed as a suspect and actually helped investigators analyze the very crime he'd committed. The security footage showed a figure in a Florida cap moving through the store, but the angles only captured the top of the hat, never a clear view of the perpetrator's face. How do you sit across from detectives knowing you're the killer they're looking for and help them analyze footage of your own crime? What level of compartmentalization does that require? For months, the case seemed to be going cold. Bernard even consoled workers who were traumatized by finding their manager's body. The community was growing anxious, fearing the perpetrator might escape justice entirely. But sometimes investigators' best tool is taking a step back and asking, who haven't we tested? And that's when they realized they'd never taken DNA from the helpful loss prevention manager who'd been assisting their investigation. Multiple detectives had actually requested Bernard's DNA sample throughout the investigation, but each time he'd provided reasonable excuses and the requests were forgotten. After all, he was being so cooperative, so helpful. Why would they suspect him? On August 14th, 2013, investigators finally obtained Bernard's DNA sample. The results came back on October 16th, 150 days after the murder. The DNA was a perfect match for the cap found at the crime scene. When detectives confronted Bernard at his home, his response was remarkably casual. "Whatever, guys." "Great. I didn't do it. This is crazy." Even with DNA evidence staring him in the face, he maintained his innocence. But the story doesn't end there. Rather than face trial, Bernard accepted a plea deal in April 2014, admitting to first-degree manslaughter instead of the original second-degree murder charge. This decision sparked outrage from Larry's family and the community. Why offer a deal to someone who'd betrayed everyone's trust so completely? The prosecution's reasoning was practical but controversial. Proving intent to murder would have been extremely difficult. Had the case gone to trial, they might have failed to secure any conviction at all. The plea deal guaranteed Bernard would serve significant prison time while sparing Larry's family the trauma of a lengthy trial. As part of his confession, Bernard admitted to the full scope of his theft from Toys R Us, and investigators discovered something else troubling. Despite the domestic violence restraining order that prohibited him from owning firearms, Bernard had illegally possessed a pistol between July and October 2013, the entire period during and after Larry's murder. He'd lied to federal agents about disposing of the weapon. On June 24, 2014, Bernard was sentenced to the maximum penalty, 25 years in prison followed by 5 years probation. During sentencing, Larry's widow Jill delivered a heartbreaking victim impact statement that brought the courtroom to tears. Her words cut through the legal proceedings and revealed the devastating human cost of Bernard's betrayal. "I lost my husband, my best friend, the man who I love so much. We were supposed to grow old together, raise our children together, and watch them grow up. But instead, he was taken from us. Our daughter, who was 4 at the time, lost the best father she could have. They did everything together. She just doesn't understand how someone could take her father away from her." These weren't just words on paper. They represented a family shattered by one man's greed and violence. A 4-year-old girl asking where daddy went. A wife facing motherhood alone. A child who would never know their father's voice or feel his embrace. Bernard chose not to address the court. He offered no public expression of remorse beyond his plea, though his attorney claimed he was sorry. But here's what lingers about this case, the questions that remain unanswered. How does someone compartmentalize helping investigate their own crime? What drives a person to risk everything for what might have been less than $10,000? And perhaps most disturbing, if Bernard had gotten away with the theft, would he have continued escalating until someone else got hurt? The community has rallied around Larry's family in the years since, holding memorial events and supporting his widow and children. But the scars from this betrayal run deep. When the person hired to protect becomes the predator, when someone's morning routine becomes their final moments, it reminds us that danger can come from the most unexpected places. As one journalist who covered the case noted, he'd never written about a victim who was so universally loved. Larry Wells was simply a father excited about his growing family, a manager who treated his employees like family, someone who showed up early to work because he cared about doing his job well. Bernard Grucza was supposed to be the guardian protecting that workplace. Instead, he became the wolf among the sheep.
I still can picture everything. It was the worst day of my life.
What do you think drove Bernard to take such an enormous risk for what might have been a relatively small amount of money? Could this tragedy have been prevented if the warning signs had been recognized earlier? And how does someone live with themselves while helping investigate their own crime? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And if you found this case as disturbing as I did, consider subscribing if you haven't for more deep dives into true crime cases that reveal the dark side of human nature. Because sometimes, the most dangerous person is the one you never suspect.